people, it's Paul here at Green Shower Homestead. Going to talk to you about pressure tanks. It's very important to have a pressure tank, and the reason for that is the pressure tank pressurizes the water through the house. This is the water line where the water comes into the house from our well, and then it goes into this pressure tank, and then it would then be fed through the house, pressurized by the pressure tank. If you did not have a pressure tank, every time you open a faucet or flush a toilet or call for water of any kind inside your house, the pump has to kick on in your well to pressurize that water. And that's a big deal because that's going to happen several times a day, a whole bunch of times. Every time you open a faucet, that pump's going to have to kick on. Now, if you're off-grid, that can't happen because that's going to kill your batteries in no time because of the amount of power that a pump uses. Most of you are not going to be off-grid, but even if you're not off-grid, that's going to tax your pump to where you're going to prematurely fail your pump very quickly, because that would be a horrible drain on your pump. So you need to have a pressure tank because when the pump kicks on, it fills this pressure tank, and this tank holds 36 gallons. So in our situation, my wife and I use between 40 and 50 gallons of water a day, usually closer to 50. If we have a bad day, we might use 60. But by using 50 gallons of water a day, our pump's only kicking on twice because this holds 36 gallons. So we'll only have to fill this tank twice in a day. So our pump's kicking on 2 times rather than multiple times. That's going to save the life of our pump because pumps are very expensive. And the average homeowner can't replace their own pump. If you have a deep well, you can't get that pump up out of the well. It takes a rig to pull. You've got to have certain apparatus in place to pull that pump. I mean, it's a big deal. And replacing the pump is easy, hooking it onto the line and then hook the wires back up. That's easy, but it's getting the pump up out of the well. Plus, pumps can range, from $800 to a couple $1,000s. They're not cheap. Pressure tank will run you $300. So that's why you need to have pressure tanks. It saves your pump, and it's just a whole lot cheaper when the time comes. I mean, eventually you are going to have to replace your pump, but hopefully just once or twice in your lifetime rather than multiple times. So what we've got here is a dual system. That's why we have 2 tanks. We've got a cistern and we have a well. So the reason we have a cistern is the wells in this area run a little finicky, and from time to time they will run dry. Ours has not. We've been fortunate, but in the event that the well was to run dry, we can run off the cistern. The cistern holds 1,200 gallons of water. Like I said, we're using about 40 gallons, 50 gallons a day. So we're out several weeks worth of water just sitting in our yard in the cistern, and all I have to do is run to town. To the treatment plant. Where the treatment plant is about 7 miles from our house. So a 14-mile round trip, I can get 250 gallons of water and dump it in the cistern. And I can do that once a week just to keep the cistern level up. And you just put the quarters in the machine, the water comes out in bulk, fills up your tank, you come home, you dump your tank in the cistern, bam, you're done. So that's why we opted to have a cistern, so that's why we have a dual system here. Now the other good reason for doing that is should the well run dry or whatever, we've got that bulk water sitting out there, and it's a good place to dump the water. I can dump my tank in there like I just mentioned. But the other good thing about it is, say this pressure tank runs, fails, or the pump in the cistern fails. Eventually that's going to happen. If there's some kind of a problem where we can't get water out of the cistern, it's as easy as closing that valve and opening this valve. We have water again because the water will now come from the well into the pressure tank and through the house. Because I've shut the cistern off and I've opened the well line. So now the water's coming out of the well and feeding our house. So we would not ever have any loss in water unless the well was dry and the cistern wasn't working. And that's a scenario I don't even want to deal with, but I can't imagine both of them going bad at the same time. So by having this dual system, we should never be without water. And when this pressure tank did fail, it was 95 miles to a round trip to the town where they have the pressure tank. I had to go to the big town, and so it took me about an hour to get this all taken apart, and then I had to drive a 95-mile round trip, and then it took me about an hour to put it all back together. So that would have been a substantial amount of time for my wife not to have any water, but she was fine because we were running off the cistern. So after I got the pressure tank all back installed and up and running again, the water just came out and refed the cistern, filled it back up to the float valve with whatever she had taken out of it while I was gone and working on it. So good situation there. That's why we have both. So let me mention one thing here where I screwed up. When I went to town and I bought this tank, I was wanting to buy another one of these, but they didn't have one. So I had to get this 36-gallon tank, which is obviously wider than this tank. Now, I wasn't even thinking about it at the store, but I'm buying a wider tank. I need a longer T-bar. See, I've got this gap here between the switch plate and the tank. I don't have a gap between this switch plate and the tank. In fact, I couldn't even get the switch plate back on right. I had to turn it sideways just so there was room to get it in there. And then I can't put the cover on it because there's no room to get the cover on it. And that's why I've got this thick piece of plastic right here. That makes sure that there isn't a spark that arcs from the switch plate to the tank. This hasn't been a problem. I know some of you are going to look at that and go, "Oh my God, what's he got?" But it hasn't been a problem. It's not going to be a problem. And I'm going to eventually get another T-bar. Next time we're in that town, I'll go buy another T-bar and I'll get it on there and get a wider one. So I wanted to mention that so you don't make the same mistake I did. Wider tank, longer T-bar. So the T-bar is it's literally a piece of plumbing that's shaped like a T. That's why they call it a T-bar. And it screws into the bottom of the tank, and then all the apparatus, your gauges, your spigots, and your switch plate, they all hook onto that T-bar, and they work together in union with each other. So what happens is, here we have a 4060 PSI tank. So the low side pressure in this tank is 40, the high side pressure in this tank is 60. So when the water line drops in here, the pressure in the tank also drops with it. So when the pressure in this tank gets down to 40 psi, that's when these switches kick on, and they tell the pump in the well, kick on because I need some water. So the pump kicks on and it starts pushing water, and you'll hear the water coming into the tank. You'll hear that whoosh of water coming in, and then as the water fills up in this tank and it reaches 60 psi, then the switch kills the power to the pump, and the pump stops sending water. So when this tank is full, the pressure on this gauge right here is going to read 60. When the tank is near empty, it's going to read 40 because it's a 40-60 tank. This is a 30-50 tank, so same thing. When the pressure on this gauge reads 30, this tank is going to call for water. When it reads 50, the tank's going to stop calling for water. Why I want to mention that is, when you buy your tank, if your tank fails, and it will, and you go buy a new tank, it's got this valve here, just like you have on your car tire. And you take a tire pressure gauge and you push it on there, and when that tank is brand new out of the box, you haven't hooked it up, you took it out of the box and it's just sitting on the floor with nothing hooked up to it, a 30-50 tank needs to read 28 on the tire pressure gauge when you hit that. A 40-60 needs to read 38. It should read 2 psi lower than the lowest number. So 28 psi, 2 psi lower than the 30. So that's important because there's good factory workers and there's bad factory workers, and things get missed, things get bypassed. So when you take the tank out of the box, make sure it reads 28 psi. If it's low, add water or add some air in there with your air compressor. If it reads high, let a little air out, because that's going to affect the pressure inside your tank when it's got water in it. So let's say it read 28, it was correct. This tank empty, your PSI was 28, and you got everything hooked up, and then the tank filled up, and you notice that your PSI on your gauge here is only 40. Okay, now you need to adjust your pressure switch here. So on the back side of this pressure switch is a spring, and it's got a nut on top of it. I think it's a 1/2 inch nut, but don't quote me on that. Now to increase the pressure inside this tank, you're going to turn that nut clockwise, turn it about 1/2 turn. And then when the water in here drains out and the tank refills again, check your gauge and see if then it's reading 50. If it's still not reading 50, give it another 1/4 turn, let the tank empty and fill back up, and then see if it's 50. And then just keep adding, turning that screw 1/4 turn until you get your upper pressure at 50. And on this tank, same thing, only 60. So, you know, that's how you synchronize everything. Is that your pressure screw there, and that's why you want to make sure that the tank reads the proper pressure when you take it out of the box. 2 psi lower than the lower number, and then you want your upper number to be either 50 or 60. The tank will tell you on the nomenclature whether it's a 30-50 or a 40-60 tank, and that's how you'll know that. So that pretty well covers it. The only other thing, you know, it's got this little nut here up on the top underneath this plastic thing. You might wonder what that's for. That doesn't do anything. They just weld that nut on there, and then they screw a pipe on there as they run it through the paint sprayer. So that's all that's there for, is to suspend the tank as it runs through the paint sprayer, and then they put that cap on there just for aesthetics. So that doesn't do anything at all. So I think that pretty well covers it. This Paul Greenshower Homestead. Get yourself pressure tanks for your wells or your cisterns. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please give me a subscribe and give me a click on the like button there. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time at Greenshower.